James, never Jim or Jimmy, but James, to distinguish him from his father, Big Jim. Aunt Lou said it was just another example of his mother putting on airs. Junior was too common for her son. I thought it suited him. To me, he was Jesse James, the affable outlaw with his low-slung jeans and hip-shot smile. He was my first cousin, once removed, but I'd never had much to do with him until the summer he was shipped down south to serve out his parole on my grandparents' farm. That summer I was told to have nothing to do with him whatsoever, as if he could infect me with convict cooties or something. At least that was my mother's attitude. My grandparents were more forgiving, or perhaps just more realistic. They were kind, unexcitable people, and it was difficult to imagine them as the source of my own mother, who got excited about pretty much everything. The farm had become kind of a dumping ground for unwanted kids that summer. My parents had parked me there while they jetted around the country consulting specialists about my brother. It was the summer he got his first operation, and the summer I got my first bra and my first bike, and to my mother's relief, finally resigned myself to the idea that I wasn't a boy. The bike she'd picked for me was embarrassingly pink with pearly streamers and flowers on the saddle. My mother was about as subtle as a kick in the teeth. I had her old room where I was surrounded by her creepy dolls with real human hair and eyes like stroke victims. James had been exiled to the shack down by the creek, as per my mother's instructions, but he came up to the big house for breakfast and supper. Every morning I would stare at his reflection in the old-fashioned percolator that had pride of place at the head of the table. It was stainless steel with a hollow glass knob where you could see the coffee spurt up every few seconds like Old Faithful. I would watch as our reflected faces joined and broke apart like the blobs in a lava lamp until my grandmother would say, "Chrissy, what is your fascination with that thing?" I would look away, cheeks burning, while James dispatched his bacon and eggs with the efficiency of an engineer, oblivious. We were a good ways north of Tipton, which was a two-bit town anyway, and hemmed in by the Mississippi River and the western shore of Reelfoot Lake. It must have felt like the back of beyond to a city kid like James, but he'd quickly taken on the coloring of a native, gotten himself some shit-kicker boots and a straw cowboy hat and a tin of Skoal chewing tobacco, which over the course of the summer would wear a faded white circle into the back pocket of his Levi's. As soon as my grandmother released me from the household chores, I'd go find him, bare-chested and whistling, lean muscles popping with sweat while he worked at whatever task my grandfather had set him to, replacing rotted fence posts or mucking out the stable. "What's the forecast today, Junebug?" he'd yell as soon as he saw me, and I'd yell back, "Hotter than the devil's asshole," or "hotter than a porn star's panties," or any mildly risque nonsense I could think of to make him laugh. I'd make camp nearby, laying out an old quilt and a pile of curled and yellowing National Geographics that I'd rescued from the basement. They were infested with silverfish and smelled like old cheese, but I didn't mind. I'd lie on my stomach and flip through the pages, kicking my feet languorously in the air like a 1950s pinup, while I listened to James whistle his way with gentle irony through The Farmer in the Dell, Old MacDonald, Turkey in the Straw. He was a gifted whistler. "Why don't you read to me, Junebug?" he'd say when his lips got tired. And so I'd read to him about tribes in the jungles of Borneo, where the men wore hollowed-out gourds on their thingies and the women pounded roots bare-breasted. James didn't mind having me around because I was his get-out-of-jail-free card. With me in tow, he had the freedom of the open road. In my grandparents' thinking, the responsibility for my care and safety would counter any impulse towards youthful hijinks, at least of the sort that had landed him in his current predicament. I lived for those moments when he would grab the keys to the truck and yell, "Saddle up, partner, let's get this show on the road." Often we'd just drive, in the late afternoon, with the sun turning everything golden, when the long shadows of trees bordering a field could touch something ancient in the pit of your stomach. On Saturdays, we'd go into town. We'd stop by the hardware store with its smell of varnish and freshly cut lumber, then on to the Winn-Dixie to pick up this or that for my grandmother. I liked pushing the buggy, while James collected items from the shelves, shortening, cornmeal, some chips that we'd share later, sitting on the dock waiting for the fish to bite. I liked how the women looked at us with envy, their own carts overflowing with howling children and diapers and beer for husbands who were most likely parked in front of the TV and couldn't be bothered to help with the shopping. Afterwards, as a special treat, sometimes we'd go to Boyette's for catfish and cobbler. Boyette's was the only real restaurant in Tipton, and stepping through its doors was like stepping into a time warp. Cypress paneling on the walls, black and white linoleum tiles on the floor, fans spinning overhead like dervishes. We'd sit knee to knee in one of the small booths next to the window, and when James stole French fries off my plate or laughed at my stories, I would light up like a firefly. When the competition arrived, I didn't see her coming, but she was like a black hole. I knew she was there by observing her gravitational pull. James had been sprawled cockeyed across the seat, and although he didn't actually move, I could feel the shift in him. His muscles tensed and his gaze, which had been lazily wandering from my face to the fat green bottle fly buzzing against the window to the man haw-hawing with the girl at the counter, suddenly zeroed in on something and held. The name on the little tag above her left breast said Bernice, but she said her name was Tracy. Bernice was the last girl who'd worked there, and they hadn't bothered to make new tags, and she was just there for a little while. She was going back to college over in Union City in the fall, she explained, looking at James. I saw how he was looking back and started kicking the table with the toe of my sneaker. James narrowed his eyes at me. The look said, "Quit it," but I just kept right on. I guess she was pretty. I could tell James thought she was pretty, or pretty enough anyway. She had whirls of curly blonde hair spilling out of a clip at the back of her head, and big boobs spilling over the top of her uniform. I looked down at my own chest, nipples poking out uncertainly into the world like the snouts of wild animals. I looked back at Tracy. I'd seen girls like her at the pool back home, slathering flat stomachs with baby oil and iodine, making eyes at the lifeguard, while I skulked next to the snack bar, wearing my towel like a burqa. "Y'all aren't from around here, are you?" Tracy was saying with stunning originality. Her cheeks were flushed bright pink, and the little gold cross around her neck trembled as she leaned over to swipe a rag across our table, giving James an eyeful. He took in the view and then leaned back in the booth with the cool of a professional gambler. Before he could say anything, I piped up. "I'm here because my brother is sick, and James is here because he got arrested and kicked out of school, and his parents didn't know what else to do with him." The words came out in a breathless rush, my voice high and childish. The look James turned on me said a good deal more than "quit it." Tracy's eyebrows went up, but when they came down again, I saw I'd made a mistake. She was intrigued. "Maybe you can tell me what there is to do that's fun around here," James said, ignoring my outburst. I kicked the table again. He caught my ankle and gave it an unfriendly shake. Tracy rolled her eyes at the lack of fun to be had in Tipton. "Maybe I could show you around a little, if you want. I get off work at 6, she said. "I'm stuck looking after my little cousin here, but maybe I'll get some time off later for good behavior," he said, and winked at her like they shared some joke. My face felt hot and then cold. "Quit being a dick," I said, the word arcing across my tongue like electricity. He looked at me for a minute, surprised, and then he laughed. "Quit being a baby," he said, but there was warmth in his voice, and he was looking at me, not Tracy. On the way home, James turned up the radio and we sang along to Elvis, "Love Me Tender, Love Me True." We passed miles and miles of fields dotted with the rusty skeletons of irrigation systems, and then the state prison with its razor wire and guard towers and the notices not to pick up hitchhikers. I thought about James inside, smiling like Cool Hand Luke at the men who wanted to break him, and felt a dark, unexpected thrill. What was it like, I asked, being in prison? James shrugged his shoulders. "I wasn't locked up for long, and I was still 17, so it was juvie, not a prison like that," he gestured out the window. "Once you get the lay of the land, it isn't so terrible. Boring. It was boring." "Did you like that girl?" I asked. "What girl?" "At Boyette's, Tracy." His smile was more than a little wolfish, but he said, "She was okay, I guess, if you like the cheerleader type." I chewed on that for a bit and then asked, "What type do you like?" "The type that doesn't ask so many questions," he said, and winked at me. My mother would usually call on Sunday evenings. I could imagine her sitting in some beige hotel room, her leg joggling a mile a minute, the ashtray on the nightstand overflowing with cigarette butts encircled with the bloom of her lipstick. I would hold on tight to the handset of the old olive green rotary phone in the back hall as she talked. She would always start with, "Hi, sweetie, it's Mom," as if I were in danger of forgetting, and end with, "I hope you're being good for your grandparents," and in between, "Your brother's such a trooper." "Is he getting better?" I'd ask, and hear the long indrawn breath of my mother taking a hit off her cigarette, and then the exhale, and finally she'd answer, "We hope so, sweetie. We hope so. The doctors are working really hard." I'd hang up fast before the bright, cheery shell of her voice cracked into a million pieces. Thank you.